Hey again, it's Judd. This is the first video of a new series I'm calling I'm Not an Expert, but that I'm going to be talking more about the writing process, some of the tools, some of the tricks that I use to plan the world and get the book out the door. So if you're an aspiring author, you do a lot of writing and want to get a book done, um, hopefully these tools will help you do that. So today I'm going to be talking more about outlining tools, character building, and some of the templates and tools that I used for All That Will Burn. So let's check it out.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some outlining tools for authors. Like the title says, I'm not an expert, but these are the things that I use to write All That Will Burn. And if you're thinking about writing a book, maybe that'll help you too. So the first thing I want to talk about is a spreadsheet that I call a scene outline. Again, I probably didn't invent this, pieced it together from blogs and other books that I've read. But this is just a spreadsheet that outlines each chapter, each scene, and all the parts and pieces that go into it. So here you got the chapter number, the scene. I use this to keep track of which ones were edited for my drafts. I've got artwork, plot changes. That's more between drafts. Some theme symbolism notes. So I like to take just notes on that of patterns that I see forming, but not trying to force that in so heavy-handedly, more after reading it back and forth. So earlier, these gray columns are what I use to really plan out the scenes. So description of what happens, is it an action scene, a falling scene, a rising scene. I like to use that cadence, not so much when I'm writing, but just more thinking about the gist of each chapter and just letting it go from there. In here, what does each character want or need? What's stopping them? So what do they do about it? That's really the key to the plot of the story of what happens, and more importantly, the why. Everything has to make sense about why someone would do something. It should be natural, and the reaction should be believable. I've also got some subtext ideas here and a plot holes column. When we would read drafts and talk about it in my writing group, I just take notes about, oh, how did this happen, or why does this person know this? So to keep squashing those plot holes as they come up. So it's a really good tool. Just catalog all that stuff. Again, I'm not like I'm more visual, so I need things like spatially organized to make sense. I can't just keep track of it in like Scrivener or something like that. I also keep track of my timing. So if I gotta start editing this by this date, since I work mostly on the nights and weekends, I gotta keep a good pace so I can get things to my editor and back in time. So it's a process to stay on track and get all this done. I was also thinking about word counts originally, so that I'm hitting my marks and just giving a sense of like, oh, this feels a little weak, this feels a little heavy, that kind of thing. So for characters, I have a background in user experience, so which is like designing websites and products for people, and typically you do user personas. So it's a way to capture the gist of a person to build empathy and if you're designing for an elderly woman who has poor eyesight, that's not you, so you need to have something to refer to for that context. It's the same thing for books. So you got all your description info, and then your key characteristics. What do they fight for? What do they fear? Fear is really the important part. Like, what are their flaws? Because that's really where the conflict comes from. A lot of people don't like, casting quote unquote their characters. I particularly do. One day I would love for my book to turn into a movie, but again, more visual. Like I like to have kind of an idea of what they might look like, and then have that as a template. So you can see some of these characters. This is Alana. I use some of like the beat up imagery because they're in war and they fight a lot. So Terafik, you can kind of see some differences. Bethuel. So a lot of some backstories that are not even in the book, but they inform how the character should be in my eyes, and so the reader eventually gets a little taste of that. So you're with fantasy book especially, you're going to be over engineering most of the world and then never telling anyone about it. So it's a lot of work. So along those lines, I've also got this document, which is my vocabulary. So for fantasy especially, you've got a lot of stuff you're making up, and so it's oftentimes I forget the things that I've made up earlier. Both the conceptual, like what is it called, and then what's their language for it, and what does it mean. With All That Will Burn, it's a convergence of Latin and Spanish, kind of Roman Catholic plus Aztec. So a lot of the words are actual words from all languages mixed together to kind of give it more of a fantasy feel. You'll recognize that, like Umbra, especially. It's got some. That's like a Latin word. Aurora and Halo. Some of these things are somewhat obvious. Others are not. The demons, which I eventually renamed the Muertes. So some of this is even old. I haven't actually gone back and updated a lot of this stuff. I am doing that for the new book that I'm working on right now, actually. So going back through and figuring out what the final languages I used and all the terminology and rebuilding all this for a more cohesive reference point. So I've got places, festivals, roads, angel names, the saying of demon names, just other people's names, and council members, all that kind of stuff. So it's just a way to like, oh, when you write, something down, you can put it in here and just you've got one source for it. This is just a tip that works for me. When I'm writing, I tend not to get hung up on a place name. So when I'm writing, it's like, oh, and she came from the city of XXX. Or fill in here, and I'll just mark it in red and keep moving, because one, it's not super critical to the plot. So if you're writing, it's easier to just keep a flow, make up a name, and Fred, the councilman, saying XYZ, and then the hierarch named Sarah, and then you can go back and change them, because it's better to get all that stuck, or to not get stuck rather, and keep moving. Because otherwise you're going to be on Wikipedia and you're finding names, you're going to spend 30 minutes doing names, and then you lost your place, and it totally kills your momentum. So it's better to keep moving, come back, and then get into lore mode, and then grind through all the names. At least that's what worked for me. So I also kept track of, this is really early, but just lore things. So again, I built a lot of this on kind of Aztec ideas, so reading about their religion. And so this cycle of the sun and their creation myths, and aligning it with the history of the Orvita. I'm not going to sort of highlight this too much because it might give away some stuff for the sequel. But, just what happens when. These are for paintings. Sophia's life, just what happens. Questions. This is really a good way to think about, like, why does this happen? Why does this happen? What are these? Why doesn't this happen? Why don't plants grow? Why are there no kids? So for a fantasy setting that doesn't have any like bounds in the real world, it's really important to just like keep track of these ideas. But again, for me, I can't do it in like a narrative form because they just get lost. So I like to keep it in a spreadsheet and be able to categorize all that stuff. So yeah, these are a lot of the tools that I use. Everything's in Drive. I like Google Drive just because I can work at a coffee shop or on my computer at home. And it's everywhere. I to keep a local copy of my drafts. But yeah, it's not that complicated. It's just more about setting a rhythm, setting a pace. And I'll probably do another video about just like the discipline of word count and how I like to manage my week, if that's interesting to people. And yeah. So next time we'll talk a little bit more about some process stuff and how to actually get through some writing. Hope this was helpful. Thanks.